Hello and welcome to our newest edition of Beyond the Politics, a regular examination of the events happening right here in the Quinte region and the people who work so hard behind the scenes to make it all happen. I'm your host, Paul Martin. Joining me, fairly recently elected member of Provincial Parliament for Hastings, Lennox and Addington, Rick Bresee.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for inviting me to come out today.
It is. I also live in the riding, so it's going to be a good opportunity to sort of take your temperature in a lot of the things that are happening, both provincially, looking forward, looking back, and we have a municipal election coming up very soon. So your thoughts on just generally some things that affect municipalities and provinces jointly. Before we get to that, I just wanted to say a few quick words. It has been another difficult week for members of our policing communities right across Ontario, as two members of the service died recently in Innisfil, a victim of gun violence in a heated confrontation with someone at a private residence. Our thoughts go out to everyone who is part of both the civilian and uniformed officers right here across the Quinte region and in Ontario who are grieving at this loss. We are with you and we feel your pain. So Rick, what was the election night win like? So let's go back. It's been a little while. But of course, this is June. Not your first election win, and we'll talk about that too. Of course, you were previously the mayor of Loyalist Township. But certainly this is bigger scale, more votes, bigger arena in that sense. What was it like for you in June, not just when the party won, but when you specifically won in Hastings, Lennox, and Addington?
Well, I can tell you that even after 7 elections, it was the first time that we had a party after the election. And it was absolutely wonderful to have everyone out to that event. Obviously, it was better because it was good news and that we took a strong mandate from that election. It was a great election. I mean, one of my favorite things about being a politician, and I've done this, as you've already mentioned, I've done this for a long time, getting out, knocking on doors and talking to people, talking to individuals, whether it's in the coffee shop or across the table like this, is likely the single best part of any of my political work. So always enjoyed the elections.
Now, of course, in previous municipal elections, that would have been pre-COVID. This election, COVID-19 was certainly a factor. What was it like going door to door? Was there some apprehension about that, or do you still feel like you were able to meaningfully and significantly interact with people?
It was still very effective, actually. I always took masks with me, and as I approached doors, it became my habit to say, do you want me to wear a mask? One of the things I've always had to respect is the fact that individuals can manage their own risk, but they'll tell you how they feel about managing their own risks. So if they prefer me to sit there and talk with them with a mask, so be it, that's what I did. If they prefer to be without mask, I was comfortable with that. I've had all my vaccinations. I've actually had COVID as well, unfortunately, but as a result, I was quite comfortable that I was safe, and as long as the person at the door, or whoever I was talking to, the constituent, was feeling safe, then I continued on.
Now, this election provincially back in June, there were a bunch of different factors that went into it. Voter turnout overall was low, historically low at 43%. Your win in terms of the percentage of the vote was high, more than 50%, and a huge lead between you and the second and third candidates, who were quite close in the standings behind you. Yeah. NDP finishing second, I believe, and Liberal third. So if that's the case, what did you take from all that? Were you energized by the fact that your win was so big in terms of percentage of the vote? Did you have any concern that the provincial percentage of the vote was down?
It was in some measures, it was a tough election in getting people engaged. Again, I've heard this from my colleagues across the province, that getting the volunteers out, getting that going, and I think that was a reflection of the fact that there have been so many elections over the past 4 years. Going back to the previous provincial, there's been 2 federal in between, and a municipal, of course, and then ours on top of that. People were exhausted. Many of the same people that had worked on all of these various campaigns were quite tired. So we didn't get as many volunteers out. We still got around to people. I do recognize that we didn't get a huge voter turnout overall. And I'm not sure what that answer is. I mean, I've heard various political analysis of that, and my thought is that in general, people were relatively satisfied with the government that had been for the previous 4 years, and so weren't clamoring for change. And it's the change elections that typically raises the temperature and raises the voter turnout.
Now, this was your first time running provincially, so congratulations on the win.
Thank you.
1 for 1. As part of that, this election, though, as I said, is a little different, and not just in terms of how some of the individual ridings shook out, but also in terms of how the provincial picture as a whole changed. Now, the Tories still have a huge majority here in Ontario, but this was the second election now that not only were the NDP second, but the Liberals were a distant third, and not even in official party status. So in terms of the internal conversation that you and the other members of the Conservatives have had, has there been a general acknowledgement of the fact that the Liberals are in a rebuilding phase? Like, where does this leave the provincial political scene?
And one of the things that I want to point out is the fact that it's very unusual for the second term of a government to get an even bigger mandate. And so from that perspective, this was an incredibly successful provincial-wide campaign. So, all credit to the people that ran the provincial campaign,
sure.
and they did a great job on this. And the government over the previous 4 years did a good enough job to get that win and get that growth. We are finding that politics in general, or I'm finding anyway, that politics in general is becoming more binary. Right? It is just the polar opposites that just have to be there. And unfortunately, that means that if the PCs are in government, the opposition is going to scream that everything they're doing is wrong, no matter what it is that they're doing. They could do exactly what the opposition asked for, and they still tell us it was wrong. Right? It's an unfortunate kind of state of the world that a lot of people are talking about, this binary positioning that everyone takes. So it makes for, I'll say, a heated question period.
Before we were talking about municipal government, which of course you were also the mayor of Loyalist Township for a few periods, but the election's coming up soon, and we didn't talk about the importance of voting and the importance of municipal government. So if you had a chance to address the people, not just in Loyalist Township, but in all the areas watching here who are thinking about not voting, what would you say?
Please do so. I mean, ultimately, municipal government is the level of government that is closest to you, closest to what you do every day. They're the ones that run the parks, they're the ones that pick up your garbage, they're the ones that are involved in your everyday. Right? You need to pay attention. Please ask questions, ask the candidates questions, look at their web pages, do whatever you need to do to find out what's going on. And while you're at it, give them ideas. Talk to them. Tell them what you want. And in the end, again, the most obvious statement, please vote. Right? It is incredibly important. We see lower and lower turnouts for municipal elections over consecutive years. It is really important to get good council members, and only the voters can actually make that decision. So please, get out and vote.
Let's talk about your background. So once again, just go over the process. Why did you originally decide to get involved in municipal politics, as we just talked about, in Loyalist Township?
Way back when, again, at the time I was 33 years old, my kids were 5 and 7, and I had learned that my local council was looking at taking one of our neighborhood parks, which at the time was basically an open flat space of grass, right, and turning it into a beautiful garden that the seniors could come out to. There were some elements of it that would be community gardens, some elements of it that would be, rock and flower gardens. And again, I have nothing against beautiful gardens, but the kids need places to play. And that flat open space was what that was about. So I disagreed with what was going on with that particular council decision. So I started attending. I looked at what was going on with that particular council. And while I live to regret this, I looked around and realized that most of them were grandparents, not young parents. And so the phrase that I used for my first election, and again, this is the part that I learned to live to regret, is there was too much gray hair on council.
Oh!
Yep.
Sharp.
20 years later, I maybe shouldn't have used that phrase, but I certainly, again, it was what drove me to get involved. It's a community that I grew up in. I knew it well and had been around it most of my life. And as I got involved, I got deeper and deeper. I started working with the Conservation Authority. I started working in economic development and realizing what the municipal role in so many more pieces were, and found it to be incredibly valuable, incredibly meaningful work to do. And again, at the time I was working full-time at St. Lawrence College, so it was the kind of the side of the desk job or the evening job, and I always enjoyed it. I always enjoyed the communication I had with my residents and the ideas that they brought forward. My wife will tell you that it takes me an hour to get through the grocery store because I stop and chat with everybody. It's not always a good thing for my wife, but I certainly enjoy it, and so again, I've been doing it ever since and loving it.
So talk a bit about your family.
And well,
you mentioned it, but round it out for us.
And well, I am again. My wife Heidi is wonderful. We have a blended family. We had 5 kids. Unfortunately, we lost our daughter and to leukemia about 5 years ago now. Very painful thing to go through, of course, and one of the reasons why I am a huge advocate for making sure that our healthcare system stays as up to date and stays as universal, which means your health card, not your credit card, as much as possible. But having gone through that, the families come out the other side. My kids range from 22 to 29 years old. I've got 2 grandchildren that live out in Gananoque. They're actually, Maddox about to turn 10 years old about a week and a half from now. No, next week. And,
better get that right.
Better get that right. And Hudson is 4. So they're just absolute joys, and love spending time with the kids.
Well, my condolences on your loss. Thank you for sharing that with us. I myself work with Hospice Quinte and survivors of loss who have learned to carry it as you have that as a deeply personal thing. So thank you for sharing that with us. And for telling us about everything that's happening at the different levels of your family. What plans does the family have? So I mean, now COVID is still here. Let's not gloss it. COVID is still here.
COVID is still here.
But the vaccines are here. People are getting out for the first time in a long time, as we saw this last summer, to get out and do more activity. So now that you have the opportunity to do the same thing, what is on Rick Bresee's itinerary for the fall and for 2023?
Well, quite immediately, as I said, my grandson's birthday is coming up, and so we're heading over to one of the local corn mazes on Sunday and taking them out and picking our pumpkins and doing that side of it. So in the short term, that's on the radar, certainly. Larger, as you mentioned, COVID is still here. My other daughter has COVID right now. She lives in Toronto and with her partner, and they both have COVID, unfortunately. But on the plus side, her job is in cybersecurity. She works from home, so she's able to continue working because she's not, well, there's been times when she's felt quite bad with it, but for the most part, it's just a matter of managing the COVID of that. We're, living through COVID, keeping going. My mother and stepmother are both still with us, and we spend as much time as we possibly can. Of course, this last weekend was Thanksgiving weekend, so I got to spend time with both of them, and I've eaten way too much turkey. I think that's all the meat I've eaten in the last 4 days, actually. But so no, it's going to be a great fall. Of course, another 2 weeks, and I'm heading back to the legislature, and I'll be there from Sunday to Thursday night. I do have meetings on the Fridays and Saturdays while I'm here. I try to dedicate the Sundays before I leave later after supper on Sunday to get up to Toronto, but I try to dedicate those Sundays to my family.
That's where we have to wrap up. This has been Beyond the Politics with Rick Bresee.